What is up, guys? Welcome back to the spring edition of Your Favorite Anime Isn't That Popular. I need a better title for that. But yes, my winter what is popular in Japan versus what's popular in the US was pretty successful. A lot of people enjoyed that video, thought it was very informative, and so I thought I would keep doing it for each and every single season. In a lot of cases, a lot of people believe that Mal and Anichart and all these other Western aggregation sites are pretty much the pinnacle of what is actually successful and what is not. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. While yes, overseas distribution and licensing is pretty much 50% of the anime industry right now, a lot of producers and publishers are actually looking for what's actually making sales in Japan, like light novels and mangas. But honestly, for me, it's more seeing what is actually successful in Japan and how that sort of lines in with my taste, because in most cases, my favorite anime are pretty much all the way at the bottom of Mal and Anichart. Case in point, Onimai last season was way down on the charts, and in Japan, it was #1. Now, yes, the usual fine print here. What is top on a chart does not mean it's great or anything. What you enjoy is often going to be not what everybody else enjoys. I fully understand that myanimelist and anichart isn't an aggregation of what you should watch. It's just an interesting metric to see what sort of is taking off in different regions. And that's pretty much where I leave it. But, like I stated in my last video, what is popular in Japan can often cases mean what's going to get a sequel, and that's very important. Now, popularity doesn't mean sales, but it could. So with that all said, let's dive into what is popular in Japan versus what is popular in the West for the spring 2023 anime season. Now, as per usual, when we look at anichart and myanimelist, which is our Western perspective of what's popular in anime, we're pretty even on the two charts. Vinland Saga, Oshinoko, and Demon Slayer are kind of fighting for each other in the top ranking. Then you have things like Hell's Paradise, Dr. Stone, and surprisingly, for me anyways, Mashle. And as things go further and further, you're kind of getting this even ground where a lot of things have kind of similar amounts of popularity versus the other. Yamada-kun, Tonikawa, Cheat Skill, Skip and Loafer, that's way too low. Insomniacs, again, way too low. Dead Mount Deathplay, Ranking of Kings, Dangers in My Heart, way too low. Come on, come on, people. Gems down here. Again, this is the part of the course for me. Things that are amazing for me are way down low. Now, some ones I want to point out specifically on Mal and Anichart for the Western audience is things like Gundam, The Witch of Mercury, which is way down at around 30, Otaku Elf, which is at 35, and yes, the Onimai of the season, that's kind of spoiler, I know, Idolmaster Cinderella Girl U149 is at 43. Oof. Nobody's trying to protect those smiles. What is wrong with you people? Now that we have sort of our groundwork laid for the Western audiences based on Mal and Anichart, again, this isn't the end-all be-all, but this is a good metric, let's start looking at Japan. Now, the rankings that we're looking at specifically is anikore, which is sort of like Japan's Mal, Akiba Soken, which is sort of an aggregator of rankings, and finally Nico, which is a streaming service platform. Again, I want to stress that these rankings that they have on these three sites are varied. There's a lot of similarities between them, but keep in mind that this is a lot of ranking systems that rely on a lot of data that is available to one and not the other, whereas some items are not available for some platforms, so it's going to be varying. Again, this isn't the end-all be-all. It's just metrics that users have put together, services have put together, or availability has put together. For anikore, the most interesting thing they had in this list was Uma Musume Pretty Derby. Yes, the YouTube series they put out there, that one is all the way at #1. Very successful, which makes a lot of sense because that property, the mobile game and everything is very, very successful in Japan. So it makes sense that that's kind of transitioned. Plus, you could also state that it's a lot in availability. Having it available to pretty much everybody is probably help its success, which is sort of in line with what I'll talk about later with Blue Orchestra. They continue with Oshinoko as #2, Skip and Loafer #3. Thank you, Japan. Thank you, Japan. They know how great Skip and Loafer is. But again, that sort of plays in the idea that Westerners don't really like slice of life, unfortunately. Japan is pretty on top of it. They enjoy it. It gives them that sense of nostalgia for their childhood and everything, whereas the West, we just kind of poo-poo it. I just said poo-poo it. I'm sorry. Then we get into things like Demon Slayer, which is, a given. But an interesting one, a very interesting one, #5 on anikore is Otaku Elf. And this extends to the other two websites as well. Otaku Elf is really high up there. And I think that's a lot to do with the references and stuff that's in it. For a lot of people in the West, Otaku Elf is full of references to the past in Japan. So you gotta have a lot of insight into their history in order to get a lot of the jokes. I myself even struggle with the show. Then we get into Gundam The Witch of Mercury. They still love it. Whereas the Westerners don't want to give it a shot, they still love it over there. And then, number 7, Cinderella Girls U-149. It's up there. It's up in the top 10. People love it. Which again, like I said, it's not number 1 like last season with Onimai, but it's pretty much the Onimai of the season. One of those shows that people find uncomfortable just because they're young characters, and that's fine, but at the same time, I think Cinderella Girls is extremely innocent with its nature. Then we get into Dr. Stone, Yamada-kun, Dangers of My Heart's number 10, which thank you, Japan. And then, oddly enough, Heavenly Delusion at 12. And the last one I want to point out is Blue Orchestra. That one, oddly, I think is doing very successful in Japan, whereas I think it's not so much successful over here on a lot of the charts because of, unfortunately, availability. It's not anywhere. You can't find it. You have to go get a global version somewhere in order to watch it. Now, when we move to Akiba Soken, this is the interesting thing. Number 1, I don't know how this happened because it's not in any of the other lists in Japan. Akiba Soken, number 1, marginal service. Why? Why? I don't hate the show, but at the same time, it's like, where did that come from? Like, who's paying who to get that high? I don't see it anywhere elsewhere in Japan. Like, Anikore and Nico, they don't even care. But moving on from there, we have Konosuba, Hell's Paradise. This is the only place is on Akiba Soken that you'll see Hell's Paradise. It's way down like 27 for Anikore. But then they have My Home Hero above Oshinoko. Wow, that's interesting. Then Heavenly Delusion, Summon to Another World, Second Time, Deadmount Deathblade, and Mashal. Moving on to Nico, which again is kind of an internet streaming platform in Japan, and a lot of these rankings are probably going to be based on the idea of what is available to stream on that platform. But it hits immediately Demon Slayer, Oshinoko, Gundam is number 3, thank you. Cinderella Girls is number 4, again, it's the Onimai of the season. Konosuba, again, Otaku Elf is number 6. Uma Musume Pretty Derby, that one's consistently up there as well. Roboco's still up there, I think that's going for second core. Dr. Stone, and then Yamada-kun. Now that we look at the list themselves, I think the more interesting stuff to look through is things like Oshinoko, which is pretty much consistent across the board. For the Western charts, it's placed 2 on MAL and 4 on AniList. And in Japan, it's 2nd in 2 places and 5th in 1 place. So Oshinoko, I think across the board, worldwide, is doing really, really good. And it's, in my opinion, it's deserved. Demon Slayer seemingly doing well across the board. It's doing obviously really well over here. Anikore, it's 4th place. Nico's 1st place. Vinland Saga, as per usual, is just a big, massive unknown. Like I said when I was talking with the winter season rankings, it's like really popular in the West, but not so much in Japan. Not that it's unheard ofly terrible or anything like that. It's just over here, it's number 1, and over in Japan, it's barely hitting any rankings. Like in winter, I think it was way down at 70, and now it's completely uncharted. It's just one of those series that kind of like Cowboy Bebop, which does really well in the West, but just kind of not so much in Japan. Like I mentioned earlier, Cinderella Girls is literally the Onimai of this season. Now, granted, it's not number 1 in Japan rankings, but it's way up there compared to the West. Nico has it at 4. Anikore has it at 7, whereas again, in the West, it's like in the 40s. And that makes a lot of sense because, yes, 1, it has a stigma around it where it's very young girls and Western anime fans, for the majority of people that watch anime, it's not fighting and powering up and stuff like that, so nobody watches it. And there's a stigma around it that if you watch it, you're into that kind of stuff. Which I think if you think that, then that's your problem. That's a you problem. I enjoy it. It's very cute. It's very fun. And compared to Onimai, it's very tame. It's very innocent. Even though it does touch on the industry and how some things can be uncomfortable. It doesn't dwell in it. But it's super cute. I'm planning on making another video here soon. Heavenly Delusion, I think, is interesting because it's kind of holding strong across the board. It's a series that I think is easily like getting up there as my number 1 of the season so far. But in Japan, I will admit that it's sort of a little bit lower than the West. But consistently across the board, it's doing really well. And I'm really happy about that. Blue Orchestra is the biggest oddball of the season, I think. And again, I think that's more to do with the fact that availability in the West. In the West, it's like 34 and 35. Whereas Japan, Anikore has it at 14, and Akiba has it at 26. While not terrible, it is up there, and again, I think that's availability. Hell's Paradise, I think, besides Vinland Saga, is probably the biggest stinker that a lot of people are going to be bugged by. It's doing really, really well over here in 4th place and 3rd place. And yes, Akiba Soken has it at 3rd, whereas Anikore, which again is like a mal in Japan, it's way down at 28. So it's kind of interesting, even though it has the rankings, it doesn't have the scoring, I guess. Like I mentioned earlier, Gundam the Witch of Mercury, thankfully, is getting a lot of love over in Japan, whereas over here, where was it? Like way down in, hold on, I'm still scrolling, way down in 30th place. Really, people? It's getting so good. But like I said, over in Japan, like Nico has it at 3, anikore has it at 6, so it's still getting love over there, which is a good thing. Dangers in My Heart is criminally low at 17 in the West, whereas Japan, thankfully, it's up there in 11th, which it deserves it. And I think they have a lot more recognition over there for a lot of people that are working on the project that it's literally showing in the show with things like the music artists and stuff. And finally, the last one I think is like the biggest oddball, but again, I mentioned most of it earlier, is Otaku Elf. It is getting a lot of love in Japan, sitting at around the 6th place where it's 35th over here. But that's it. That's the ranking differences between Japan and the West. I hope you guys enjoyed this video just like last time. Again, last winter's video did really well, and I loved a lot of the feedback. People really enjoyed seeing this insight into the anime industry in Japan itself. Like I said before, these charts aren't the end-all be-all, but it does give you an idea of what's, you know, successful in different areas and what that could mean for the future, whether it be like sales or just popularity in getting sequels. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that like button down below. Leave me a comment. Let me know, do you fall in line with Japan or do you fall in line with the West? And what do these rankings mean to you? Additionally, if you have any sort of insight into charts in Japan or other links, other services that can kind of help with these ranking systems, I want to do this every single season. So any way that I can prove it is definitely welcome. Additionally, if you want to support this content more, I have a Patreon link, a tips link, super thanks button down below, as well as a membership button. I greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel. You guys mean so much to me, and y'all take care.